Hey everyone, I've got two things in the game plan for you today. First, I want to show you inside my stem mixing process with my Lightspeed template. I've been working on a aggressive drum and bass tune for a client, and I want to show you how I approach stem mixing when I want to be working quickly with a minimum amount of time and fuss. Second, I'm testing out a new plugin, Fuel by Music Hack, which is a multi-effects plugin, and it is a mad loudness tool and color box. And I want to take you inside the session to be able to show you how I've been testing and applying this plugin to be able to dial in the right amount of saturation, aggression, punch, loudness, all the other good things for this particular tune. So let's have a listen to where I'm at with the session. I'll just play the drop.
One thing that I guarantee, ain't nobody going in like me. I'm a mix of a man and beat, the way I stomp on a random beat. I got the drip and I plant the seed, put in work and expand my reach. I get my cool like antifreeze, antifreeze, antifreeze.
Right on. So we'll start by just deactivating all of the plugins on the master so we can kind of dig into the mix, and I can show you the submixing process. If you haven't really been on this channel much and you haven't seen how I work, this is my Lightspeed template, and it is a template that I use for doing mixing when I need to focus on results quickly and I don't necessarily want to dial in and dig into all of the individual tracks if I don't need to. I start from the top down and I work on these bigger groups of tracks to start with. The Lightspeed template, if you want to grab it, is available for Ableton Live, FL Studio, Bitwig, Studio One, Logic, and more DAWs coming all the time. There's a link directly below the video where you can grab that for free if you want to work inside of this structure. And to give credit where credit's due, I learned much of this structure from Grammy award-winning engineer Luca Bertolesi from Studio DMI, who is the engineer for Skrillex and Diplo and many more. A lot of times I have clients that don't have a huge budget to be able to have me fussing with individual sounds if I don't need to. And so I work like this from the top down on these groups. So broadly speaking, we're divided into bass, drums, mid-range instruments, vocals, effects, any returns if there are. I'm not using returns in this case. And then a ducking structure. Okay, and then everything routes out to the main track. And let's start by taking a look at I think the drums is a good place to test out Fuel. So here's what we have for drums. Nice. So yeah, pretty standard drum and bass beat. And let's just set up a little loop there. I will deactivate the instance of Fuel that I have on there already, and let's grab a fresh one. So Fuel is a multi-effects plugin. Here we go. And let's make it big. Let's make it large and in charge. Cool. So as you could imagine from the biggest knob that we have there, it makes things loud, but it does so in a really interesting way that takes the place of many other plugins that I would normally use in a chain. So it does saturation and compression. It does bass harmonics and to an extent EQ. It does some widening. It does soft clipping. It can add a crunchy fuzz distortion. And then it has a very clean, fast limiter that can get things sounding super hyped really, really quickly. So I'm not going to give you the exhaustive tutorial every feature. I'm going to show you kind of how I use it on these individual sounds, and we're just going to take it for a test drive. So let's listen. I'm going to turn these down. And let's listen to what we think these drums need when they're clean, right? So I'm hearing that they could definitely be run into a clipper. So that is what we have right here. We have a soft clipper. Now, when working with Fuel, it's important to not fool your ears with loudness, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this Unity mode. I'm not going to use oversampling just because it makes my CPU freak out sometimes when I'm capturing the screen with video. Normally when I'm working with plugins that generate harmonics, a lot of times I use oversampling. Sometimes I don't, depends on the situation. But for the purposes here, I'm going to leave oversampling off just to, save my CPU from dying on me. So yeah, we're going to use Unity, which is going to loudness match the input with the output, okay, as we turn things up. So here's the other thing. A lot of times when I'm working on drums, I work in parallel. So I get some settings dialed in and then I back off the mix and I'm nudging that in with the clean sound. What else do we have here that we can play around with? We have the thick knob. So the thick parameter is broadband saturation. So it's going to color the drums. And it also introduces some width under the hood. I don't know exactly what is going on. So let's just have a listen, see if we like it on the drums. Yeah, sounds kind of neat. Let's play with the crunch. Probably going to be over the top too much, but let's just see what that sounds like. Yeah, that's super blown out. Too much for me on this particular sound, but for some genres that could be really interesting. And for other sounds, I would totally use this. Now let's go over and check out the compression side of things. So we have comp, and then you flip this and it says OTT. OTT stands for over the top, and it is kind of, from what I understand, loosely modeled on the infamous Ableton Live multi-band dynamics preset called OTT, over the top. It is a combination of multi-band compression upwards and downwards, and it's just this kind of vice grip that levels out each one of those frequency ranges. And it has become quite popular in bass music genres, especially on these kind of full range bass sounds where you want them kind of locked in place. And so it's interesting. They've added that in. And then on the comp side of things, this is a standard compressor. It's a fast compressor that actually is capable of grabbing transients. And the compressor, it doesn't have a crazy ratio. I think it's 3.5 to 1 compression ratio on this. And so let's see how the compression sounds. It'll begin to bring up low level material and reduce dynamic range. And let's see if we like that flavor. Now, we have a bypass button, which I use frequently, especially with Unity on, right? So you can do a global bypass, but you can also bypass the individual modules by clicking on them like this, right? So that's actually useful if you've got your other parameters dialed in and you just want to feel out if you want to be adding in this new parameter. So let's kind of A/B. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And then the body parameter down here is upwards compression. Okay. So that's going to bring low level material up in a way that is different from the standard compressor. So this compressor is a top down compressor. It's going to push down on peaks that exceed the threshold based on the ratio. You don't have any control over that. It's kind of like, this is part of actually why I like working with Fuel, because I don't oftentimes want to dig in and fuss with all of those details. You can kind of get into analysis paralysis because these are one knob parameters that are scaling things underneath the hood. They allow you to work very, very, very quickly to get the sound that you want without getting lost in kind of parameter fussing. You know, you're not deciding here if a 2.7 ratio is going to sound as good as a 3:1 ratio, right? You're just turning the knob and using your ears more than your eyes and parameter input fields, right? So let's have a listen to body. So body is going to take the quieter material and push it up, and it's not going to touch the peaks, right? It kind of rolls off as you get to 0 dBFS. So let's check this out. I'm actually going to turn the compression off, and we'll just use the upwards compression. Okay, there's a difference on the transients, right? You hear the difference on the peaks with that. So that's an interesting one. I kind of like what the compressor is doing to the peaks here. So that is just a quick run through of Fuel and my workflow on drums. Now, once I'm ready to commit to the settings, I take Unity off because Unity is a floating calculation, right? So once you're ready to actually commit to your settings, you turn Unity off, and then you can use this output here to gain stage down, right? And you do this just by ear. So I listen and I put bypass on and off, and I kind of gain stage things down. So it's not just making everything louder, okay? So you can turn the plugin on and off, or you can bypass it or take it off bypass, and you're not getting a loudness jump. That allows you as a producer or engineer to make proper decisions as to whether the processing you're adding is actually making the sound better versus just louder, okay? So let's just quickly demo how that process works. I mean, listen to and look at how much louder this plugin is making things, right? It's a loudness monster. We'll delete that, and we'll kind of take a look at the actual processing that I was using. And I was being much more light touch here on my drums, and I was just using a little bit of soft clipping, 40%, and then I had it nudged down in the mix. So now let's take a look at and listen to the bass. Let's do the bass next. So here is... let's go bass and drums together, because a lot of times, that's the foundation of the track. And let's listen to what we got. Cool. So like we did last time, I'm going to just mute fuel, and we'll put in a freshie. And the cool thing is you can click the interface and you can make the UI a different color with different skins. And that's actually, I kind of like that, making the skin a different color on my different groups, my different submixes. So I kind of know visually, okay, gray is the bass and red is the drums, or whatever I choose to do with it. Okay. Now I have this ducking structure. So if we just solo the bass, you're going to hear all these pokey holes in it because there's hard ducking that's happening to the drums. So I'm just going to turn that off with my hotkey. Okay, let's expand fuel again. Okay, let's have a listen to the bass and play around with fuel. Okay, first things, Unity on. Okay, this is one we haven't talked about yet. Bass. So the bass knob is going to add some bass-oriented harmonics. So these are not going to be full-range harmonics. These are going to be focused down on the bass. And then it also can introduce a spectral shift. So it can give a bump to the bass centered on 80 hertz. So a lot of these knobs, things change quite dramatically as you turn them up too. So a lot of times you want to explore the different ranges with Unity on. And yeah, let's just listen to how this kind of thickens up the bass. Yeah, interesting, right? So again, thick is the broadband saturation that can also play with a bit of width. And then the bass parameter is focusing harmonics down in the low end and that 80 hertz bump. So in this case, I kind of like the, that juicy processing there. Let's experiment with some soft clipping and maybe some of the OTT and see how that sounds like. Whoa. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so when we bring in the OTT, you can hear all that fizzy stuff on the top end really starting to get blown out. And that's what the OTT is famous for, right? It's famous for taking these bass sounds and just blowing out and bringing up all of this low-level material that you don't normally hear, but it can sound good in some cases. I don't know if I love it on this particular use case, but let's just go back and listen for that. Yeah, sweet. Okay, so one thing I want you to know is that the loud knob is not affected by wet dry. Okay, everything else here except the output parameter is affected by the mix. So you can blend in the compression, the saturation, harmonics, the soft clipping, the crunch, the upwards compression. You can blend all of that stuff in parallel with the wet dry knob, but then the loud is intended to it's able to be last in chain. So you don't want any peaks escaping that with a parallel processing chain. So the loud knob definitely catches everything, and you can kind of just work with the other parameters without worrying about anything going over 0. Okay, and then of course the output parameter, the output gain, is going to be able to gain stage things down even after the loud knob, right? So let's go ahead and commit these edits and take Unity off, and then just see how much louder this has made this. Dude, okay. So you've seen I've turned the output gain down as far as it'll go, -12, and it's still not enough for how loud this thing has made the bass. So if I was going to do something like this, I would just actually add a utility after it and gain stage down, because I always like to have those equal loudness comparisons. But that is nuts. Okay. So yeah, there it is on bass. Now let's take a look at what I actually did in the mix. Again, I was probably much less heavy-handed. Let's make it the same color. There we go. And let's make it big. Beauty. So yeah, you can see, what have I done? Soft clipping, yes. Okay. Not using the OTT, didn't like the sound of that on this particular bass. Definitely hitting some compression though. Whoa, okay, yeah, I maxed out those bass harmonics with that boost, and then I'm using a touch of loud. Yeah, no wonder I had to turn it down by 12 dB, hey? So, and then I've got it mixed 60%, so let's listen with bypass on, and then chuck it in there. Nice one. Okay, so that is a quick introduction to Fuel. And I want to mention something else, which is I did a video recently talking about how to find the perfect loudness level for your EDM or bass music song. And a lot of people, because I was working by turning the loudness up, a lot of people mistakenly thought that I was advocating getting loudness in your mastering phase. And that is categorically untrue. It's a bad practice, and it's also not what I believe at all. In fact, I advocate the exact opposite. And this process of working on the stems is an exemplification of exactly what I am trying to teach you, is that loudness does not and should not come primarily from the mastering phase. Yes, you're going to add some loudness in mastering, but if you try and do the heavy lifting on your master, then it's going to sound bad. You're going to get all these bad artifacts and trade-offs because you're doing too much in the master and not enough in the mix. So this is a fantastic plugin because it allows me to add color, to be able to add density, to control dynamic range, to add punch, to add sizzle, to really sculpt the sound with these one knob parameters that are doing a whole bunch of stuff underneath the hood, and allows me to take what might normally be a 20-hour mix and do it in 2 hours. Okay, so it allows me to work really expediently and avoid these complex processing chains that I would otherwise have be knee deep in when using a plugin like this. I just want to pause for a quick sec here and give a shout out to Music Hack, the sponsor of today's video and the makers of Fuel. It's because of sponsorships like this that I'm able to offer you guys so much free stuff. And if you haven't seen it yet, where you can get all of that is back at the Warp Academy site on our free stuff page. So just take a look at all the stuff, and I've added to this day in and day out. We have courses on Ableton Live, sound design in Serum, vocal production, all kinds of mixing and mastering stuff. There's a set of templates and samples like go through here, guys, and make sure you're getting all this stuff. My Lightspeed template is here. We also have a set of project files for different genres. So you can see how those are produced inside of Ableton Live. There's just tons and tons and tons of stuff here, racks, and all of that stuff. The reason I'm able to give this to you for free is because of sponsors on the channel. So big ups and thank you to Music Hack for helping us out on the channel here. I want to show you a couple other things in this stem mixing process. This is not the only video I'm going to do on my stem mixing process. I'm going to do others. Obviously, you guys can see there's a ton of other effects, especially on the master, right? There's a ton of other stuff going on that enable this session to sound the way it does. I'm going to do future videos on that because there's a lot of dynamic EQ. There's width processing that I'm doing that is enabling Fuel to be able to do what it does. I just want to dig into one particular thing because I talk a lot about clipping. Fuel is obviously a clipper, and it also is a fast limiter, which can approximate what clipping sounds like as well. And I want to show you something here. When it comes to drum processing, there is a hack that I want to show you. Okay, so let's go ahead and just turn off everything. Actually, I'll turn this on. Yeah, so let's just listen to the claps, okay? Well, snare. It's a snare. And what I want to show you is when you add anything in there that is going to restrict dynamic range, especially clippers and fast limiters, okay? Here's now where we have the drum. Now, there's a lot of body to that. There's a lot of sustain to that. And that is what happens when you begin to push drums into a clipper or a limiter, is what used to be kind of a short, snappy drum. Then the transient is getting pushed down, the body of the drum is getting pushed up, and now you have these really like kind of fat, guppy looking sounding drums that are loud, yeah, but they lose their snap, they lose their punch, they lose their attack, okay? So there is a trick that, this one I also learned from Luca Pratalesi, using isotope neutron transient shaper, okay? It doesn't need to be neutron, it could be another transient shaper, and making an extreme move before and then again after the clipper. So we are sandwiching the Fuel with two transient shapers. And let me show you the first one. So I'm using neutron, we're in precise mode, we're using it broadband, and I'm pushing up the attack by 6 dB, and I'm taking the sustain all the way down to its complete minimum, negative 15 dB, using the sharp mode, okay? And this is going to dramatically increase the amount of punch that's getting clipped into the soft clipping in Fuel, which is good because clippers are magic. And this is one of the things they do that's kind of magical, is it takes off peak level, but retains and sometimes even increases the perception of punch and perceptual loudness on the drum because it's compensating for the loss in level with the addition of a short burst of distortion. Okay, and that can sound really beautiful when you thread the needle and it sounds good. And this is how you prevent your drums from being blown out with huge distorted bodies when you go into a clipper. Okay, so now let's listen with neutron, and I'm gonna bypass it and turn it on. So you can especially hear that in the white noise, the rattle part of the snare, right? Okay, so now let's take a look at what I'm doing after the clipper. And I'm doing kind of the similar process. No attack. I'm doing a negative 4.5 dB on the sustain precise mode and medium instead of sharp. That just sounded good to me here. And let's go ahead and A/B that. Right? And then let's listen to that actually in the mix. Okay, so yeah, drum envelope shaping is definitely something that I'd like you to pay attention to if you are using clippers, compressors, saturators, limiters on your drums. And like, let's be honest, you are. Okay. Especially if you like music like this, you're using all that stuff. Maybe all of it all together. A lot of people, when they show me music, they're like, yeah, I got this to like whatever loudness. It's super loud. I'm like, yeah, it's loud, but the drums they sound horrible. And when you start hearing this stuff, you'll start to hear it everywhere. A lot of these really loud songs, dubstep, drum and bass, a lot of the songs that are in the higher loudness ranges, they suffer from this problem. Flabby drums, big sustains, tails that are blown out. And, subjectively, I don't love it. I don't know, maybe some people like it, but it just, to me, makes the drums lose their impact, their punch, their perception of energy. And you really need to tweak this stuff if you are engineering your music in a way where you're slamming it like this, right? Well, let's have one more listen through the drop now that you guys know what is going on, and let me know if you like the sound of Fuel.
One thing that I guarantee, ain't nobody going in like me. I'm a mix of a man and beast. The way I stomp on a random beat, I got the drip and I plant the seed. Put in work and expand my reach. I get my cool like antifreeze.
I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you thought about this video below in the comments. What do you think of this approach? Do you like stem mixing? What do you think of the results? And what do you think of Fuel? I would appreciate a thumbs up if you like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Please stay in touch, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.